Welcome back into the archives, weary traveller. Tonight you'll walk beneath the streets of ancient Rome, far below temples, markets and bathhouses, as you discover a hidden system that worked overtime every day to keep the city alive. You'll observe how their daily routines worked, how waste moved through stone channels where blockages formed, how maintenance was handled, and why failure was always close but rarely complete. This is not a story of emperors or monuments. This is a calm, methodical look at systems, processes, and overlooked labor that made everyday Roman life possible. Before we begin, if you enjoy slow, detailed history designed to help you relax or fall asleep, you're invited to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you can find your way back into the archives again. Now, settle in, traveller. Let your breathing slow as you journey into the depths of the ancient Roman sewers. Meet the men who maintained them and understand the processes that kept the sewers functional. The working day begins before most Romans even think about waste. You stand above ground at first because that is where every problem originates. Streets slope slightly and intentionally. Water knows exactly where to go. Waste follows this same logic. The sewer cleaners understand this better than anyone else in the city because their day is shaped entirely by what gravity collects overnight. They gather near access points positioned with purpose rather than convenience. These openings sit near public latrines, bathhouses, market streets, and low ground where runoff naturally accumulates. Their placement reflects centuries of observation. No sewer entrance exists by accident. The cleaners do not rush underground immediately. First comes assessment. Weather is noted. Rainfall matters more than time. A dry night produces slow, predictable flow. A storm reshapes the day entirely. Even yesterday's rain matters because saturation changes how quickly debris settles or moves. They consider what has already happened above ground. Bathhouses were cleaned at closing, markets closed late, taverns emptied gradually, latrines operated continuously. These are not guesses, these are patterns learned through repetition. Route planning follows expected input. Morning inspections prioritize bath districts where large volumes of warm water recently entered the system. Warm water temporarily increases flow speed and reduces sediment adhesion. This window is short. Once water cools, behavior changes. Market routes are scheduled later. Refuse accumulates slowly and unpredictably. Street sweepings enter drains unevenly. The cleaners know which streets produce more debris because those streets maintain a certain flow. Once underground, the system reveals itself not as a tunnel but as a network of gradients. Roman sewers are shallow by design. They rely on constant movement rather than force. There is no pressure, no containment beyond stone and slope. Gravity is the only engine. You walk behind them as they descend. Lamps are lit low, not to illuminate space fully, but to show surface texture and water movement. Bright light hides uneven stone. Dim light reveals it. The first task is inspection. Cleaning comes later, if at all. They observe water depth at known markers. They listen to sound as flow moves around bends. They note sediment buildup where velocity slows. Every pause has purpose. Doing nothing is often the correct action. You notice how often they pass debris without touching it. Not every obstruction requires removal. Some material anchors larger blockages temporarily, preventing downstream surges. Removing it too early creates new problems elsewhere. They test resistance using simple tools. Hooks gauge sediment softness. Baskets are prepared but not filled immediately. Removal is staged. The goal is not cleanliness. The goal is regulated flow. Timing governs everything. Remove too much early and water accelerates dangerously. Remove too little and the sediment hardens. The cleaners aim for balance, not perfection. As the day progresses, inspections repeat, conditions shift and new inputs arrive. Some sections stabilize naturally, others worsen. The cleaners respond selectively. No one aims to finish a route completely. There is no completion state. The system never rests. Maintenance exists to delay failure, not to eliminate it. By midday, the city above feels distant, not physically but operationally. Underground, Rome is reduced to water, stone and waste behavior. Social rank dissolves quickly in the sewers. The routine ends above ground as quietly as it began. Tools are checked. Lamps are extinguished. Nothing looks different to anyone passing by. That means the routine worked. The sewer system operates under permanent constraint. You follow the cleaners deeper into sections where limitations become obvious. Capacity is finite, channels are narrow, stone walls tolerate only so much stress. There is no overflow system designed for emergencies. When limits are exceeded, failure occurs visibly and unpleasantly. The most immediate challenge is water volume. Roman sewers manage steady flow well. Sudden surges overwhelm them. Heavy rain is the primary risk factor. Rain introduces water faster than channels can move it, and it carries debris that accelerates erosion. During rainfall, the cleaners do not attempt aggressive clearing. This is counterintuitive but essential. Removing obstructions during peak flow can cause uncontrolled release, destabilizing footing and collapsing weakened walls. Sometimes the safest action is restraint. Another constraint is tool simplicity. The cleaners work with a small set of implements designed for versatility, not specialization. Hooks, baskets, lamps, and leverage are their entire mechanical advantage. This limits speed but enforces caution. Human endurance is a constant limiting factor. Fatigue dulls perception. Misjudgment underground has immediate consequences. Tasks requiring careful interpretation are scheduled early. Mechanical clearing is reserved for later hours. You observe how injury risk shapes behavior. Slips occur where algae grows. Cuts happen where broken pottery settles. Infection follows easily in damp conditions. The cleaners mitigate risk through pacing, not protection. Waste composition creates unpredictable challenges. Organic matter decomposes, softening blockages temporarily before creating hardened sludge. Inorganic debris never breaks down. Cloth tangles, bone wedges, pottery cuts. Each material behaves differently. The cleaners adjust technique accordingly. No single approach works universally. Structural aging compounds every challenge. Older sections contain layered repairs. New stone interacts poorly with old mortar. Stress redistributes unevenly. Failure often appears where repairs meet original construction. You see how risk is assessed constantly, not in writing but through experience. Which wall bulges slightly? Which floor vibrates differently under flow? Which junction always smells worse after rain? Public behavior introduces additional strain. Latrines are misused. Refuse enters drains that were never designed to carry it. The system absorbs misuse silently until it cannot. The greatest challenge is invisibility. Success produces no response. Resources follow disaster rather than prevention. Cleaners operate knowing that intervention is only noticed when it fails. You walk with them through a section that holds for now, not because it is strong, but because it is monitored. The system works not because it is robust, but because its limits are understood and respected daily. That understanding is what keeps Rome functional. By midday, the sewer system has accepted everything that Rome intends to forget. You walk with the cleaners as they shift from inspection to interpretation. At this stage of the day, the question is no longer where waste comes from, but how it behaves once it arrives. The sewer does not treat all inputs equally. Each category introduces different risks, timing issues, and management requirements. The largest predictable input is bath water. Public bath complexes release water in volume at scheduled intervals. This water is initially warm, which matters more than most people realize. Warm water flows faster, carries suspended debris farther, and delays sediment settling. For a short period, it improves system efficiency. That benefit disappears quickly as the water cools. The cleaners understand this window precisely. They inspect bath-connected channels shortly after discharge, not to clean aggressively, but to observe movement. If debris travels farther than expected, it will settle in downstream sections not designed for heavy accumulation. These locations are flagged mentally for later intervention. Rainwater is the most disruptive input. It arrives irregularly, carries abrasive material, and increases flow beyond design expectations. Street grit, animal waste, straw, broken pottery, and market refuse all enter simultaneously. Unlike bathwater, rainwater does not follow predictable schedules. You notice how cleaners classify rain inputs by aftermath rather than event. A short storm after dry weeks behaves differently than prolonged rainfall. Saturated stone absorbs less water, increasing surface runoff into drains. This shifts the burden from streets to sewers abruptly. Latrine discharge is constant and dense. Public latrines empty continuously and contribute thick waste mixed with limited water. This material moves slowly and adheres easily to irregular stone surfaces. It rarely causes sudden failure, but it creates long-term sediment problems. Private household waste enters inconsistently. Some households dump refuse directly into drains. Others use containers and empty them periodically. These inputs are unpredictable and often responsible for localized obstructions. Cloth fragments, food remnants, bones, and broken utensils appear without warning. You observe that the cleaners never rely on source identification. They assess inputs by physical properties instead. Density, cohesion, and response to water movement matter more than origin. This keeps decisions practical. The sewer also receives unintended inputs. Construction debris falls through street openings. Soil erodes from foundations. Plant matter washes in during storms. These materials do not break down and alter channel geometry gradually. The cleaners mentally map where each input type tends to accumulate. Bends slow the normal flow. Junctions trap debris. Shallow gradients invite sediment. These locations are revisited repeatedly, not because they failed, but because eventually they will. Inputs interact. Organic waste binds inorganic debris. Warm water loosens hardened sediment, and cold water stabilizes deposits. The system never processes materials in isolation. You realize that the sewer is not a passive receiver. It is an environment where materials combine, settle, shift, and transform continuously. The cleaners function as interpreters of these inputs. They do not remove everything. They manage interactions. By afternoon, the system reflects the city's activity patterns precisely. Markets, baths, rain, and households leave signatures underground. The cleaners read those signatures the way others read schedules. Understanding inputs is not theoretical. It determines whether the city floods tonight or sleeps undisturbed. Once waste enters the sewer, transformation begins immediately. You walk behind the cleaners as they observe changes that occur without human intervention. Organic matter breaks down, gases form, sediment compacts, flow reshapes deposits. These processes are slow but relentless. Decomposition alters waste volume and texture. Soft organic material initially reduces blockage severity, but over time it produces fine sediment that adheres to stone. This sediment hardens, narrowing channels gradually. What begins as harmless decay becomes structural constraint. Temperature governs transformation speed. Summer heat accelerates breakdown, producing thicker sludge faster. Winter slows decomposition but increases water volume, keeping sediment mobile longer. Each season favors different failure modes. Water chemistry matters as well. Bath water carries oils and residues that coat surfaces. These coatings reduce friction temporarily, allowing debris to slide farther before settling. Over time, residue thickens and traps additional material. The cleaners observe how flow sculpts deposits. Faster water creates channels within sediment. Slower water fills those channels back in. This constant reshaping means no blockage remains static. What looks stable today may shift tomorrow. Gas formation presents subtle risks. Decomposing waste produces pockets that displace water and alter pressure locally. These pockets can destabilize sediment unexpectedly. The cleaners recognize warning signs through sound and resistance changes. You notice how they probe deposits gently. Sudden collapse of compacted sludge can release material downstream violently. Controlled thinning prevents chain reactions. Stone surfaces change over time. Constant moisture weakens mortar. Abrasive debris erodes edges. Repairs alter flow paths unintentionally. Each intervention modifies future behavior. Transformation is cumulative. Small deposits ignored for weeks become hardened obstructions requiring staged removal. Minor erosion becomes structural weakness. The cleaners intervene early when possible, but resource limits force prioritization. You realize that transformation is the true engine of failure. Inputs start problems. Transformation completes them. The cleaners work against time rather than volume. Delaying transformation matters more than removing waste completely. They use decomposition strategically, allowing organic matter to soften debris before removal reduces labor and risk. This requires patience and confidence. Removing everything immediately feels productive, but often creates harder problems later. The sewer behaves like a living system without intent. It reacts to material properties, temperature, and movement. The cleaners adapt by observing patterns rather than imposing control. You walk through a section that appears unchanged. It is not. Its condition reflects thousands of small transformations slowed just enough to keep function intact. The system works because someone understands how waste changes after it disappears from view. Maintenance in the Roman sewer system is not an occasional activity. It is the work itself. You walk with the cleaners as they move through sections that look unchanged to an untrained eye. Nothing dramatic announces the need for action. No alarms, no clear boundaries between working and failing areas. Maintenance happens because inaction eventually produces collapse. The first principle of maintenance is selectivity. The cleaners do not attempt to restore channels to an ideal condition. They aim to preserve function with minimal disturbance. Every intervention alters flow behavior. Altered flow redistributes stress. Stress creates new problems elsewhere. You watch them remove sediment in measured amounts. Never fully. Removing too much increases velocity and erosion. Removing too little allows compaction. The correct amount exists only for a short time and must be recalculated constantly. They shape channels subtly. A shallow deposit is left intentionally to guide flow away from weakened walls. A small obstruction is trimmed rather than eliminated to prevent sudden surges downstream. These choices are conservative and deliberate. Stone maintenance follows the same logic. Loose material is wedged back into place rather than replaced. Mortar is reinforced only where movement is active. Old repairs are rarely removed unless they fail completely. Stability matters more than uniformity. You notice that most maintenance is preventative rather than corrective. A section showing early signs of erosion receives attention before visible failure occurs. This reduces labor later but requires judgment and memory. Tools limit technique. Without heavy equipment, leverage replaces force. Stones are adjusted incrementally. Debris is moved by hand and basket. This slows work but prevents structural shock. Access points receive constant attention. A blocked entrance delays response during emergencies. Keeping access usable is considered maintenance equal to clearing internal channels. Maintenance also includes knowing when to stop. Fatigue reduces precision. A tired cleaner misjudges resistance. Misjudgment underground produces injury or collapse. Tasks demanding fine interpretation are postponed if conditions are unfavorable. You realize that maintenance is inseparable from observation. Every step updates mental records. Which section has worsened since last visit? Which repair held? Which intervention created unexpected effects? There is no final inspection. The system never reaches a finished state. Maintenance pauses only when resources or daylight run out. You surface understanding that Roman sewer maintenance is not repaired after failure. It is a constant adjustment to avoid it. The system survives because the sewer cleaners keep intervening just enough. Seasonal change reshapes the sewer system more than the daily routines do. You walk with the cleaners as they adjust priorities based on time of year. Seasonal stress does not arrive gradually. It shifts behavior abruptly once thresholds are crossed. During dry seasons, water volume drops across the network. The flows slow down. Sediment settles more readily. Organic waste decomposes faster, producing thick sludge that adheres to stone. The risk here is accumulation and narrowing. In these months, cleaners focus on thinning deposits before they harden. They preserve just enough flow to prevent stagnation without creating dry channels where debris lodges permanently. Dry conditions also expose structural weaknesses. Mortar dries and crumbles. Stone shifts without constant moisture to stabilize it. Cracks become visible. Maintenance shifts toward reinforcement rather than clearing. Wet seasons reverse every priority. Rain increases volume quickly and unpredictably. Flow accelerates beyond safe limits. Sediment that remained stable for months became mobile at once. You notice that cleaners reduce intervention during peak rainfall. Clearing blockages too aggressively during high flow creates uncontrolled surges. Partial obstruction sometimes protects downstream sections by limiting velocity. Route planning changes seasonally. Certain tunnels become unsafe during heavy rain and are avoided entirely. Others are monitored closely because their failure affects large surface areas. Temperature affects labor directly. Heat accelerates exhaustion. Cold reduces sensation and coordination. Tasks requiring judgment are scheduled when physical feedback is reliable. Public behavior shifts with seasons as well. Market activity changes. Bath usage fluctuates. Waste composition alters. The sewer absorbs these changes without any formal adjustment mechanism. Staffing does not increase seasonally. Labor constraints amplify environmental stress. When one section demands urgent attention, others receive less. Minor issues escalate quietly. You begin to understand that the sewer system operates near capacity at all times. Seasonal stress reveals this reality rather than creating it. The cleaners mitigate risk by anticipating known stress points. Before wet seasons, they reinforce vulnerable sections. Before dry seasons, they reduce sediment load. These actions delay failure but never prevent it completely. And seasonal adaptation depends entirely on experience. There are no written procedures. Knowledge accumulates through memory and observation. You walk through a section that has survived multiple seasons through careful adjustment rather than strength. The system holds because someone expects it to be stressed and work accordingly. The sewer system functions without constant supervision, and that is not accidental. You walk with the cleaners knowing that their work exists in a narrow administrative shadow. Oversight comes from the city, but rarely from anyone who enters the tunnels. Authority operates at a distance, measured through surface outcomes rather than underground processes. The workforce is small relative to the scale of the system. This is deliberate. Rome does not staff for resilience, it staffs for adequacy. The assumption is that most days will not require intervention everywhere at once. When they do, the system absorbs failure unevenly. Labor organization is practical rather than formal. Assignments follow familiarity. A cleaner who knows a particular section leads work there regardless of nominal status. Experience substitutes for rank. There are no rotating schedules designed for equity. Routes are assigned because someone knows them. This creates dependency. If a worker is injured or absent, knowledge leaves with him. Risk increases immediately in those sections. You notice how oversight expresses itself indirectly. Complaints arrive from above ground, street flooding, latrine overflow, persistent odor. These signals prompt intervention without diagnosing the cause. The cleaners translate vague surface symptoms into specific underground action. There is no incentive to innovate. New methods introduce uncertainty and potential blame. Existing techniques persist because they are understood, not because they are optimal. Funding follows failure cycles. After visible disasters, resources increase temporarily, tools improve, and repairs expand. Attention fades as soon as surface conditions normalize. Preventative maintenance relies on leftover materials and judgment. You observe how this shapes behavior. Cleaners prioritize avoiding visible failure over long-term improvement. Stabilization matters more than optimization. Administrative distance grants autonomy, but also fosters isolation. Decisions underground are rarely questioned, but rarely supported. Cleaners manage risk, knowing they will be blamed for outcomes they cannot fully control. Documentation is minimal. There are no comprehensive maps tracking cumulative stress. Memory replaces record. Oral transfer replaces written procedure. The system depends on continuity of labor rather than continuity of policy. You realize that Roman sewer administration values invisibility. The best managed system is the one that requires no explanation. The cleaners operate with independence born of neglect. They are trusted because no one else wants the responsibility. Failure in the sewer system rarely begins where it is noticed. You follow the cleaners into a section marked by layered repairs. This area has failed before, not catastrophically but incrementally. Each repair addressed a symptom and redirected stress elsewhere. Cascading breakdown begins with imbalance. Flow slows slightly in one section. Sediment accumulates. Pressure increases upstream. Downstream channels experience irregular surges. Walls absorb stress unevenly. You see how a small obstruction can affect distant neighborhoods. Flooding appears where no blockage exists locally. Complaints misidentify cause. Intervention must trace failure backward through the system. The cleaners manage cascades through partial intervention. Clearing an obstruction entirely can worsen downstream conditions. They reduce buildup gradually, allowing pressure to dissipate without destabilizing flow. Rigid repairs accelerate cascades. Over-reinforced sections deflect stress into weaker adjacent areas. Flexibility proves safer than strength. Temporary solutions outlast permanent ones. Labor constraints magnify cascades. When one team addresses a major issue, minor problems elsewhere escalate unchecked. The system lacks redundancy. Triage becomes routine. You notice how failure accumulates invisibly. Minor flooding alters street use. Standing water increases health risk. Market activity shifts. These changes alter waste patterns, feeding back into the sewer. Cascades are not isolated events. They reshape the city subtly over time. The cleaners track failure history mentally. Which section failed last winter? Which repair held longest? Which junction always worsens after rain? This memory guides response more than any plan. When collapse occurs, response is reactive. Sections are bypassed, flow is rerouted temporarily, repairs follow slowly, life continues around partial dysfunction. You understand now that the sewer system survives through controlled failure. It does not prevent breakdown, it manages the spread of breakdowns. The cleaners exist to keep failure localized and survivable. That is the system's true function. Over time, the sewer system shapes the city as much as the city shapes the sewer. You walk with the cleaners through sections that have outlasted generations of surface construction. Above you, buildings have risen, fallen, and been rebuilt. Below you, channels have narrowed, shifted, and been patched into survival. The result is not symmetry, it is inheritance. Long-term consequences emerge from accumulation rather than design. Each decision to delay repair, to reinforce selectively, to reroute flow temporarily alters how waste moves through the city. These alterations compound. Neighborhoods experience different sanitary outcomes, not because of planning, but because of cumulative maintenance history. You notice how certain districts remain consistently drier. Their sewer routes received early reinforcement. Their gradients remained intact. Other areas flood more often, not because they were poorly designed originally, but because small failures were tolerated longer. Public behavior adapts. Streets that flood regularly lose traffic. Markets relocate. Residential density shifts subtly. These changes reduce waste input in some areas and increase it elsewhere. The sewer system responds, reshaping stress patterns underground. Health outcomes follow. Standing water increases illness risk. Latrine overflow affects nearby housing. These effects are rarely attributed to sewer design directly. They are treated as local misfortune rather than systemic consequence. You realize that sanitation quietly directs urban development. Builders avoid low areas. Property values shift. Certain spaces gain reputations that persist long after conditions improve. The sewer system also influences civic confidence. When drainage fails repeatedly, trust in infrastructure erodes. Officials respond with visible repairs rather than structural ones, reinforcing the cycle of reactive maintenance. Over decades, the sewer becomes a layered archive of decisions. Some sections are robust through continuous care. Others survive through neglect because no one depended on them heavily. The city adapts around these inconsistencies. You understand now that Roman sanitation is not a fixed achievement. It is an evolving compromise between labor, environment, and growth. The cleaners do not see these consequences clearly. They experience fragments: one flooded street, one persistent blockage, one reinforced wall. Yet together their work reshapes Rome slowly and decisively. The sewer does not merely remove waste, it redirects the future. The Roman sewer system endures not because it is perfect, but because it is manageable. You walk with the cleaners knowing that failure is always near. The system operates close to its limits by design. There is no excess capacity and no margin for neglect. Endurance emerges from continuous correction rather than structural strength. The system works because it relies on simple forces: gravity, flow, and stone. These do not require precision instruments or constant recalibration. They tolerate inconsistency better than complex mechanisms. Labor fills the gaps left by design. Human judgment compensates for material limits. Experience substitutes for documentation. Observation replaces instrumentation. You realize that endurance comes from adaptability. When one section fails, others compensate. Flow reroutes and labor adjusts. The system bends rather than breaking. Administrative neglect unintentionally supports this endurance. Without rigid oversight, cleaners adapt freely. They prioritize stability over compliance. They respond to conditions rather than instructions. The system also endures because expectations are low. No one demands perfection. Absence of disaster qualifies as success. This allows incremental decay without immediate replacement. You notice how this philosophy permeates the work. Repairs aim to last long enough. Maintenance delays collapse rather than preventing it indefinitely. This is not pessimism, it is realism. Growth eventually overwhelms the system. The population increases, waste volume rises, maintenance struggles to keep pace. Yet even then, the sewer continues to function partially. Collapse is localized rather than total. You understand now that endurance is not longevity without change. It is survival through change. The cleaners leave no monuments. They leave continuity. You stand above ground again. Streets appear ordinary. Latrines function. Water drains. Nothing draws attention. That is the final outcome. The system endured because someone showed up every day to keep it from failing all at once. And as long as that happened, Rome continued to exist quietly, reluctantly, and above all else, successfully. And there you have it, weary traveller. Now you know that when Roman sewers worked properly, no one noticed. The streets stayed dry, the latrines emptied, and the bathhouses drained. The city carried on without interruption. That quiet success belonged to the sewer cleaners, the men who worked below the surface, managing flow, preventing collapse, and keeping failure just far enough away. If this calm walk through the ancient Roman sewer systems helped you relax or fall asleep, you're always welcome back. And if you enjoy slow, ordinary, overlooked history like this, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads that spring forth from the archives. Thank you for spending this time beneath ancient Rome. Rest well, traveller.